reduced quite a lot. If you're starting without the electricity that people in this country use to run their refrigerator, you can't give up so much. In fact, you need to, for any level of justice, have access to more electricity. So Vijaya has done tremendous work as an economist, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, and has published works from everything from foreign affairs to nature, and is a terrific, I think, addition to what will be a dialogue about, let's just start neutrally. Environmental philanthropy is a big deal. It's a big source of dough, and as the boomers begin eventually, I swear to God, we're hanging on like nobody's business, exceeding all expectations. But as we start to fade away, the anticipated transfer of wealth from my generation to the next generations is anticipated to be unprecedented. That is a huge philanthropic boost, or could be. So I'd like you both to comment about where you see this nexus of environmental giving and communities that really haven't gotten their share of the pie, no matter how you define the pie. And Theo, maybe you want to start in the U.S. and Vijaya, you pick it up internationally, or vice versa.
I feel like I've talked so much already. Y'all probably tired of hearing my voice. I want to hear from you.
All right.
I just want to, get some.
You riff off on the and touch a little bit on the domestic as you close it out, and give Theo something to bounce off.
Yeah, I think that they're very interconnected. Thank you, Bill, for inviting me here, and thank you, Jennifer, for moderating this, and Theo for joining us. I'm delighted to be here. I work on the sort of nexus of the tension, rather, of dealing with climate change, and also at the same time trying to figure out what to do about the 3 billion people on this planet that don't have access to reliable electricity, of which about 1 billion people have hardly any electricity at all. And what we see is most of these people are in low-income communities or in very poor countries, including in sub-Saharan Africa, but also Asia, also Haiti. These are places where there's virtually no electricity at all. But we have, I think, you mentioned environmental giving and philanthropy. The philanthropy community is very focused on climate mitigation and on reducing emissions. And unfortunately, the easiest thing to do is to get very poor people to follow whatever rules you set. It's much harder to get richer countries to do what you want. And so what has happened is that Western donors who are engaged on the climate space have become very focused on only wind and solar for Africa. Only certain types of technology, no nuclear because we're afraid of that, no fossil fuels because that's bad for climate change. That has become the tone of environmental giving or donor behavior in sub-Saharan Africa. And for Africans, it comes at a huge cost because, as we all know, we cannot exist on wind and solar alone. Battery storage is not sufficient to power entire countries, even large-scale industry. But these countries that are dependent on either philanthropic giving or on government donor-type aid are kind of in a fix because they are looking at this community that only cares about market. I sort of think of it as Malthus 2.0. We used to be worried that there were too many brown and black people. Now we're worried that there are too many brown and black people and their carbon emissions. That seems to be, unfortunately, the nature of the debate. It's not a sort of well thought through set of arguments that underlie philanthropic giving. And I think what's really hypocritical about this is that all the actors involved know that you cannot exist on wind and solar alone. You cannot build factories, you cannot produce cement and steel on wind and solar alone, but it's become the nature of the conversation. And you're considered sort of a bad person if you don't kind of buy into this philosophy. So I think we find ourselves in a tough place in terms of how to address this massive energy gap. that means that we still have to mention the refrigerator. Most Africans consume less electricity than an American refrigerator, 2 or 3 times less than an American refrigerator. That's the kind of gap we're talking about. People who earn $1,000 a year, $2,000 a year. This is the sort of gap that we have to address. We can't ignore it in favor of climate mitigation.
Well, and appreciate that. It's a stunning stat, the refrigerator stat that is. And just one quick follow-up, and then we'll move to you, Theo, is our last speaker talked about Russia and China sort of filling the donor gap to modernize these countries with reliable energy, which is fossil fuel energy. So it's not like those countries are not committed to improve the quality of life for their people. They know they can't get there on the path that the Western donor and financing authorities have set for them. Now that's, I think, has begun to switch with geopolitical circumstances. But can you talk a little bit about just that kind of donor dependence and what ends up happening, where there's geopolitical transition as well as climate transition in play?
Yeah, a large part of this is because very poor countries must have an international guarantor for private investment. It must come from the World Bank or from some other actor. That's the reason why Western donors can leverage, so much on poor countries. They can get poor countries to do whatever they want. You cannot get India and China, for example, to reduce their coal consumption because you don't like it. That's just not going to happen. But in Africa, you can basically say, you're only going to develop on wind and solar alone because that's the only thing we'll finance. You mentioned redlining in the previous discussion. I think of this as energy redlining because, African governments are asking to develop some portion of their natural gas reserves as a fossil backup to wind, solar, and other types of renewables. Even that is being denied under this sort of very harsh set of rules, which Western donors can impose. To me, that is a form of energy redlining. Ironically, it doesn't solve the climate crisis either, because as you mentioned, there's that sunset thing. And in California, we switch to gas when the sun sets, or when there isn't sunlight for days in a row. I mean, this is the kind of pragmatic thinking that we will adopt in rich countries, but we are not willing to acknowledge that these are the same constraints that Africans face or anybody faces around the world.
Thank you. And Theo, just kind of set this off, is there was a really famous couple different incidents in the civil rights world where civil rights leaders came to mainstream environmental organizations and really said, who are you to speak for us? And the mainstream environmental organizations sincerely said, we are here to protect public health. This is a polluting plant, or this proposal will cause adverse health impacts. And they may or may not have been right about that. Let's assume they were. And still the civil rights leadership was, who are you to tell us? Where do you get off? And there have been a couple of uncomfortable peace treaties, but ultimately the marriage between the civil rights leadership and environmental leadership has remained a rocky one. And so now we have this environmental justice subgroup, and that's a more comfortable marriage. I would argue maybe it's more like a parent-child kind of thing, given relative strength. But why don't you comment a little bit on this, where should the environmental philanthropy intersect communities that don't look like the donor community?
Thank you very much. To put it impolitely, folks just have different orientations toward race, culture, and history, and the role that it plays on trying to make this world livable for everybody. And you can't talk to these communities without cultural context. You can't. We got a whole cultural setup of generally white, westernized folks who don't want to look at history and its impact on today. And we got a whole cultural orientation of black folks and brown folks who are like, nah, history is alive with us today. That's why they don't get along. The needs that we're talking about when we're talking about developing the power infrastructure in Africa and India are directly addressing the dirt that was created by 400 years of extraction. Put that on the table. Don't be scared. It's all right. As Ben Shapiro ironically said, facts don't care about your feelings. Okay, so these facts don't care about your feelings either. Now that we have these facts on the table, there is a cultural fear of history in westernized white folks. Because history is ugly. That's what it is. And there is a cultural confrontation that black folks have had to adapt to deal with the present. And there is the fact that we are both moving toward the future. A future that is in peril because of what's happening with the climate. Now, what I have done is tried to be an interpreter for both sides, right? But you gotta actually speak the cultural language and understand. And what Dubois said was, going in with a mindset of partnership, a mindset of you lead, tell us what your needs are. Also means navigating their skepticism of you, historically informed fear of you, the understanding that there is a need to have agency in that community. Sometimes I look like telling you, no, I want to deal with you right now. I am suspicious of you. And if that triggers in you a reaction that is cultivated to be afraid of the history that they represent, then that means that we can't talk. Meanwhile, we're spiraling for oblivion. You know what I mean? So, I have found no other way to do this than just to confront the history and how it affects the present and the cultural context that we are living in. What is capitalism? Like, what is making money? Is that an Iroquois concept? Is that a Yoruba concept? You know, is that an Australian Aborigine concept? What is profit motive? That is a European concept as we see it today, though there have been different economies that have had versions of that. But how we do it today, the central banking system, that ain't us, right? So you're coming in with that. We're trying to get you to see this blind spot that perhaps, and then there'll be like paternalism that you're talking about. That paternalism is what's causing the reaction in the marriage that is triggering everybody and can't nobody talk, right? I say put it out on the table. And taking the Bill Schneiderman approach of depersonalizing. This has been a very, like this brother right here has imparted to me a mindset of no enemies. That the conditioning is different than the person. Very key point here. The conditioning ain't the person. The conditioning is what's been dumped into the computer based on the mindset of the folks who raised that person. You see? And now, I can hear something that might trigger somebody else who comes from like my entire book upbringing, by the way, right? And not be triggered by that because I can distinguish. That's conditioning. That ain't that person's heart. Coming back to the table. What we want to do, make the world better. That's all we're wrong. White westernized guy or lady wants to make the world better, understands the problem a little different than I'm making, right? Because of the information over there. You're humble enough to listen to my worldview, and humble enough to learn the cultural context in which we are communicating, then we can move forward together. And that's what I'm here to do. Like my job, I am taking on the calling of having those hard conversations with people from different places than me, so that we just don't react and go to our own corner of the train that's going off the cliff.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
on this, I'm often told we need to move so fast right now, we don't have time to convince everybody to come along with us. And that manifests itself with folks who tend to demonize the oil and gas companies, and I try to remind them that the people that they're talking about for the most part, who they, in an oversimplified way, say hid climate change from the rest of us in the 70s. I was very aware of climate change, and I learned about it in class. I don't know if that was really squelched as much as it was, but those people are mostly dead.
There's that.
They're dead. And there's new generations in all of these places, but we tend to want to continue to demonize a group, even though the people that were dominant at the time that the wrong was done. First of all, the context is different at that time. It wasn't as wrong. It may have even been a developmental phase that we go through, a perfectly appropriate one. But if we demonize all the people from those communities, then we push them away. Yet it's very difficult not to do that. That leads to two different approaches in communities of color now in projects. Approach number one, I've never met environmentalists who champion this as well as developers would say, well, climate change is so important for us to deal with that we have got to just mandate that these facilities are going to go into these communities regardless. And we'll try to do it as fairly as we can, but it's too urgent. The reality is that these communities now have the ability to stop those plants. So like it or not, we have got to, I think, engage with those communities. At the same time, we're coming into communities, and I don't realize it because I didn't live it the way other people did, but communities who look back and they say, well, let's see, for 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20, 30, 40 generations, we got screwed over that. When folks come in from the outside and say, here's what we'd like to do for you, aren't you? So the tendency is you're always going to have some people in those communities, and often the most vocal ones, who are saying, no, stop, get out, even if it's not rational or not in their interest. So there are folks you'll hear from in a few minutes who are working to bridge that divide and different ways to engage. But Theo here in the States and Vijaya around the world, how should the companies that want to place facilities and the activists that want them to place facilities work with communities to diffuse the historical anger and then infuse the positive opportunity that puts those communities in charge of where they go?
That was a question.
No, I mean, look, I'm wary of being over talking stuff, but short answer is I'm still learning. I was going to actually refer to Vijaya on this because this is something that I want to see a good model of. Yeah. I want to actually, even if it's small, I want to see where this works. And then I want to scale it up to something that looks good in my look. But for right now, since I'm talking, I'm just going to say, it seems to me that the smartest way to go is to, number one, think long term in both directions in time, past and future. Think long term, right? Long term means you've got to understand what happened in Detroit when the factories were there. And the Black community, the men were very, very much employed, and Detroit was thriving. Even made a little thing called Motown happen because there was a thriving community of people who had an economic base. And then what happened when that base went away? And why those forces took employment away from there? And then let's take a great shiny idea. Look at these historical patterns and
I think we, in the international context, we're at a point where we're seeing a lot of backlash to this Western imposed preferences on Africa. part of that is the entry of Russia and China. They are doing far more infrastructure projects on the continent than any Western governments because of these rules that Western governments have imposed on Africans. And as previous speakers mentioned, that's not good for the West. It's not good generally for the international order. I think to sort of vacate this really important space of providing energy. I think the other sort of reason why there is this big backlash against these kinds of rules is Western hypocrisy. We are at a point where we are producing more oil and coal than ever, right? US oil consumption, I think, is at a historic high. Norway, which leads these efforts to do only wind and solar in Africa, is the most fossil fuel dependent rich country in the world. 14% of its GDP is from natural gas. And I think an even higher share of employment is in fossil fuels. So I think that sort of double standard is not lost on poor communities and on poor countries, that Western governments are doing whatever they like in the name of energy security. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has meant that we are producing ever more fossil fuels than before, but doing so in the name of energy security. I think African governments are rightfully asking, why can't they have a mix of renewables and natural gas to meet their energy security needs just the way we are doing? So I think the first thing we'll have to let go of to develop a consensus and to build sort of community and to move forward together, both on energy and on climate change, is to dial down the hypocrisy. Whatever we like in the name of energy security, but so should they. They have the same needs that we do. They would also like to have hospitals with electricity and schools with electricity and roads with, that don't get destroyed during floods. These are the kinds of things they want, and I think understanding what these communities want and understanding what their energy needs are would be a huge step towards building consensus. Unfortunately, we're sort of, I think, overrun by dogma rather than practicality, but that's not the standards we use at home. At home, it's all about kind of, making sure we have cheap energy. So I think that's a tension that we have to address.
Let me ask one more question and then open it up. Others want to get in on this debate. This is a very heretical debate. This is not, I think, a normal discussion about how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We're talking about, for real, justice, inclusive of a range of civil rights, not just environmental justice. So I want to just thank Bill and the sponsors of this event for allowing this to occur, this panel discussion to occur. But there was Berkeley, long-term ban, labor, whatever, environmental hate, pollution, okay, fine. So I'm working with a nonprofit that's doing these little wind gizmos. And I went out to meet with the General Counsel of the Navajo Nation. And I said, we've got the coolest thing because, and it's free, because when Roosevelt sponsored rural electrification throughout the United States, tribal lands weren't included. Just like we have huge swaths of black-dominated farmland that never quite got the natural gas service. Oops. So we have areas of energy poverty, an energy desert, call it. And so I was like, here we are, for all your now mostly older people living in these very isolated homes throughout this very vast Navajo nation. We've got this cool gizmo, that swirls around and whatever, and keep the lights on. And he about tossed me on my ear. And he said, who do you think you are? We got old people, what are they supposed to go out there in the wind and fiddle with the wire that came loose? You turn on a switch. We want to turn on a switch. We want energy equity. Similarly, there's a part of California that's now totally fixated on only allowing people to live in small rental apartments and take the bus in the name of climate change. This is a thing. It's like a real thing. So we went out to Fresno, and these people said, for the climate, to a mostly Spanish-speaking audience, we need you guys to be supportive of this program, to live in a small rental apartment and take the bus. And their answer was, who said? Exactly. We want what you have. Why are you telling me no matter how hard I work, I can never get what you have? Who are you, client? So riff off of that a little bit, because those are both real things. We need to have microgrid and locally, produced and sourced and batteries and cars that plug in or whatever. That may work a little bit, but is it really going to work for someone living in an apartment with a Section 8 voucher and either no car or a car that hasn't been new for a lot longer than many of the children in the same complex? I mean, what is the sort of role of our, I'm going to call them policy biases right now? And maybe that's too incendiary a term, but I wrote an article called Read Jim Crow, so I'm okay with incendiary. But what is the right approach? Is access to electricity a human right? Is access to energy so foundational to success that we just need it and need to get past ourselves and do all of the above? Because it's hard to go in and say, what do you think? When the answer is, I'm too busy to think. Who are you anyway?
Right. I think that's a tough one. But I think that if I'm on the receiving end of that, I just want to know what the end game is. Like, it seems like if it was branded as like not the final thing, but like a stopgap until, that might be a little different thing. If it was branded in a way that made sense to my pocketbook, I don't tell me to like never rise in life economically in America. Certainly would defeat the purpose of me coming here if I was an immigrant. So, bad marketing, don't do that. But I think that one of the key things, if you see right here, is, well, the wealthy and powerful ain't doing it, why should I? So what are the wealthy and powerful doing? Are they the adopters of this technology? Like, can you show me where they're doing this? And can you show me how this made their lives better? It just is what it is. There are luxury items that are now common items. When the wealthy adopt them, like cell phones, pretty soon everybody wants them, right? And so I think that you got to show where it worked. And one of the things that I think helps in terms of like, I raised learning the internet, right? And I became an influencer, whatever, on the internet. But compelling visuals and language that speaks to the people is a way to get things going, but you also have to show an end game that advances their agenda. Very, very important. Because if your agenda comes in with another version of the greater good that ain't involving your input, you can count on it being shut down, especially in this era of woke. And by the way, why don't we talk about this woke? Let's talk about this. How it was stolen from our community and rebranded in the most awful possible terms, right? Wokeism is a survival tool that we adapted in order to open the minds of our own community. Erica Badu said, if everybody in the community was master teachers, I'd stay woke, right? What you're seeing in this, and this is tied to this, by the way, is the fact that we're trying to create self-determination. A way to communicate with our own community that sees the best in us and figures out how to defend ourselves from historical exploitation. That's all folks are trying to do with this. There's a climate movement, right? There is a way in which we who are in these communities who have historically been on the short end of the stick want to be empowered on our own terms, empowered financially, empowered electrically, either way, right? And so you coming in saying this is for your own good ain't gonna cut it. Actually, I'll just finish this statement right here. Go for it. That's not gonna cut it. But what will cut it is figuring out through conversation, language, and cultural competency what their agenda is, and finding a way that they intersect and a bridge that your shiny solution can make that happen. That's what I was saying. I'm sorry.
No, please. There's a couple of problems in the way that we think we've inherited for the last few generations. The linear way of thinking and the top-down way of thinking about power. Linear way of thinking that the fastest way to an end is to follow that straight line. You extract resources, you use them, you dispose of them at the end of the line, and you're extracting from the earth, you're extracting from people, and you're throwing all of that away at the end of the line. That's a system that has been incredibly productive and has driven prosperity, better than any system. If you want material prosperity, material abundance, which we did when we were in the midst of a depression and a world war against fascism, we needed a lot of production. And that linear path of production was very effective at getting us that material prosperity. And then we've continued that process, including all the monetary policies and so on, that generate that kind of production ever since. So we've taken it too far. The other aspect is how you structure power, which is top down. It's contrary to democracy, which is kind of bottom up, with lots of side-to-side movements as well. Top down. There's a tendency on the part of folks that when we face a problem, first we declare war on it. And then, how many of those wars have worked? The war on drugs, the war on hunger, the war on poverty, the war on, the war on climate change. In these wars, generally, they work for a few months, and then they just make things worse for generations after that. So we declare war on it, and when you have war, you have top-down command. Command and control to control your soldiers to carry out the battle. So when environmentalists, and I don't mean it because I'm an environmentalist for life, I'm passionate about it, but when environmentalists look at a community, they say, well, we've got to impose this lifestyle on people so that they will be carbon neutral. And in San Francisco, where I live, Jennifer well knows this, they want us to all live in small rental units and take the bus. So they've structured life there to make it really painful if you take a car. Really painful. And strictly for buses, they're basically looking at the 1970s and saying, if we were in the 1970s, how would we live in a sustainable community? Well, we'd all live in small units and we'd be able to interchange and we don't take the bus. Well, this is the 21st century. Look what we did in the last century that might give us a better way. We went from the core resource being fossil fuels that we extract, that are used up as we use them, so they get smaller and smaller. Now we've invented an economy that grows based on knowledge and information, where things, instead of becoming more and more extractive, we become better and better, more and more efficient. We have moved to a source of wealth that is growing. The more knowledge you have, the more knowledge you have. And that every time you share it, you get more of it. The old resource, when I give you a bicycle, I don't have a bicycle, but you do. The new resource, when I give you knowledge, you have it, and so do I. The technologies that we invented in these last generations are the miracle energy source that we are constantly looking for. They enable us to communicate with each other 1,000 times more efficiently than we ever did before. They give us the ability to travel virtually now without even getting into an airplane. They give us these tools to experience life. I was in Mongolia, the communities, the distant communities off in the hinterlands, and they live a traditional lifestyle with their own cattle and horses and so on, and they have cell towers and solar energy on top of it. They have all the modern connective with the sense of community and connection to their history that we didn't have before. So we can live in these entirely new, right? If we stop holding on so tight to this industrial model and trying to impose the most efficient form of the industrial model on our future, then we perish. But if we allow ourselves the flexibility and the organic ability to work with communities, you know what, people are pretty practical and they'll figure out ways to get this done. But we have to have faith in the ideals that we expressed in this country 250 years ago of empowering the individual in their communities to make decisions. And I think if we live up to our ideals, just as Gandhi asked Britain to live up to their ideals, if we live up to our ideals, we actually get our democracy back in a better form than we had it before. And we get to overcome this climate challenge, not just a little bit, not just by surviving, not just by, you know, giving up our prosperity and our ability to you know, drive a vehicle. We get a better, more connected community. And I think that's what we're on the precipice of. So that's what we're here again. Yeah.
I don't feel like we're on the precipice, dude. I live in California, and it is top down. And whether it's top down from COVID, or top down solar wind battery, no matter what else, or top down, yeah, there's a million people without clean water, but maybe they shouldn't live where they live. Or, yeah, we had a problem with managing forest fires for about a century, and now we're kind of at risk. Well, we'll just kill off the insurance industry. And that'll put everybody upside down, and even more people will leave, but we'll be net zero because there are so many fewer of us. So I think we're at the height of hypocrisy, in your terms. And I think it's time to call the question. You are so much more productive in calling the question, as is everybody on this stage at least. But honestly, I don't think it's time to give everyone the space to be pursuing their passion. I think it's time to be a little more open-eyed about pain and about progress and about trying to get to some notion of, is it shared prosperity or are we just riding this train down? It's time to head out. It looks like we have one question, and we'll take that and then take a break for this very unorthodox panel. Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Craig. I'm the Chief Explorer for Community 2.0 in Holland. Theo was asking a question about stuff based on history and then based into the future to the long term. There's a body of work called Earth for All, floated by a couple of guys, Johan Rockström and Ulrich Gaffney, Swedish scientists. So I was wondering if you knew about that. They posit that at the same time as solving the physical climate challenges that we need to solve, we also need to install a more just, socially and economically just society. Otherwise, we'll just save the planet and it's screwed up again if all we have is unfettered capitalism. So I was wondering if you heard about that, and if not, after the session's over, I'd love to talk to you about that. And that's open to all of you guys.
I never heard of it.
I know a little bit about what Johan Rockström works on. I think what he's trying to do and what we're all trying to do is reconcile the fact that we have, you know, a set of countries that are highly industrialized, that have industrialized on fossil fuels, and are trying to figure out what the way forward is in terms of achieving energy security, in terms of mitigating climate, in terms of livable planet, you know, saving the planet and so on. At the same time, we have this set of countries that has no prosperity at all, you know, where none of this has happened, where we don't have schools and hospitals and roads, and they also consume very little energy. I think the key notion that I keep emphasizing to Rockström, I've been on some panels with him, is that there is no such thing as a high-income, low-energy country. That doesn't exist. Every country that is rich and that has solved poverty, or mostly solved poverty and become a rich country, is also a high-energy country. I think this is the part that we all have to come to terms with. You know, we are not going to get around the energy issue. It is foundational, as you asked earlier. It is really sort of central to any kind of prosperity. And even as we navigate a post-industrial world, you know, one of the things that's in our future here in the US is artificial intelligence. It presents extraordinary potential. to empower individuals, to help solve big health issues. But what does AI need? It needs an enormous amount of energy, as much as 10% of the US grid. So we are not getting away from these issues. And I think, Rockstrom's sort of arguments about that sort of kind of rely on the planetary boundaries idea and this idea of, consuming too much. There's no carbon budget left, he says sometimes. I can see where he's coming from based on sort of rich countries. But the fact is, we have, half the planet that's extremely poor, that is not consuming any energy at all, that is not climate resilient because it doesn't have structures built with cement and steel. And I think reconciling those things is a very, very tough challenge. Yeah. I think this is where we are all at. And he is sympathetic to these views, but I think he's also very consumed by the idea of getting to net zero or of, really sharp reductions in carbon, which I think he worries that, we are not there yet.
And time can help a lot, right? But there is this sense of it's a crisis. Everybody needs to sacrifice, of course, some sacrifice more, as opposed to it did take us 40 years to clean up air pollution from cars. It wasn't fast, but it was effective, and we didn't start by taking cars away from poor people who need them to get to work. So we just need to be a little bit more, I think, realistic and respectful.
Yeah, and I think and just one last comment to your point, Jen, about not pursuing your passion or your purpose. I do some executive coaching, so I used to ask people, what's your dream? Let me empower you to live your dream. Now I ask people, what does the world need you to do? Because we're in a crisis where we need to consider what's good for the planet as well as solving our purpose and the alignment there.
Yep. Okay. I think we should probably end.
Yeah, I think.
Are we done?
We've been told to wrap up, and they were very nice about it with their words here. Please wrap up. So, yeah. We'll talk to y'all out there.